world's population is predicted to be 10 billion by 2050, meaning we have to feed 2.5 billion more people. And to address this, we need to increase our food production by 70%. We've also got an exploding middle class, and 50% of today's populations are millennials and Gen Z who are placing new demands on the food system. Our food system is under severe pressure to produce more with less in a sustainable way. And at the same time, we need to reduce waste, tackle global challenges like climate change, manage scarce resources of water, land and labour, and also solve for food safety and security issues. Unfortunately, we are living through the COVID pandemic. Challenges in the food supply system are further exacerbated with empty retail shelves, meat packing disruptions and price increases. We're seeing acceleration of new trends where home is the new workplace, where we dine in and order food, increase engagement with digital marketplaces, and look for opportunities for touchless interaction with automation and next generation farming and proteins. Now innovation in agri-food tech has become even more important and more critical and urgent. The ag tech revolution is here in the form of precision ag, big data AI, drones, control environment and next generation proteins. We can't continue to do the same things the same way. We must innovate, adopt and embrace technology. This is why we set up Thrive, to advance the future of food and agriculture through innovation. Entrepreneurs and startups from around the world can solve these problems, and that is why we've built a vibrant agri-food ecosystem.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to the Thrive Innovation Series here in Silicon Valley. I'm John Hartnett, CEO and founder of SVG Ventures and Thrive, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by Frank Yiannas, Deputy Commissioner for the Food Policy and Response at the USDA, or the US Food and Drug Administration, where we will talk about a new era of smarter food safety. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to be with you.
Really looking forward to the discussion. And if folks would like to join us in the conversation today, you can join us through our hashtag Thrive Innovation Series, and you can join us on Twitter at our handle Thrive AgriFood. On our next slide, SVG Thrive is an innovation and investment platform, and our vision is to advance the future of food and agriculture through innovation. And we have been ranked as one of the most active ag tech investors by Crunchbase and the leading agri-food accelerator supporting global entrepreneurs. We have over 5,000 global founders in our private network from over 100 countries. On our next slide, we launched our Thrive Global Initiative last year, focused on addressing some of the key goals identified by the UN SDGs. And we did this in partnership with the USDA, the US State Department, and key partners around the world. We held specific challenges in Australia, Canada, and Africa, and we plan to launch challenges in Europe, Latin America, and Asia later on this year. On our next slide, you will see that we've had an overwhelming response from over 700 startups from around the world to join our Thrive 2021 programs. And next slide, I would like to thank our corporate partners, some of the biggest names in the food industry, and we're delighted to be working with them to accelerate their innovation and growth strategies. And needless to say, if you're interested in becoming a partner, you can find out more on our website. Our next slide. We're delighted also to partner with Bayer Crop Science to launch the Thrive Bayer Sustainability Challenge. And we will share more details on this at our official launch on April 14th. And in the meantime, you can register for this through our website. On the next slide, the Thrive Innovation Series, we have focused on the series around the food supply chain, as well as addressing some of the key challenges on feeding a growing population in a sustainable way and dealing with some of the challenges around climate and the impact of the global pandemic. We've been discussing key trends, technologies, and solutions across the agri-food industry with some of the top leaders, CEOs, innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors. And on our next slide, we will also be doing a series of Thrive events, which we've held a few already this year, and we will host our annual Future of Food Summit with Forbes in June later this year. And you can register now if you want to attend at our website. On our next slide, you can see we've got quite a large audience today. I think we've got over 500 people from 52 countries. So Frank, you're obviously popular around the world, and 37 states. So, and we can see quite a number of folks from the agribusiness, corporate and startup world. So really great to see such a wide and international audience. We will launch our poll. You should be able to see it now. We're going to have 2 questions, and you can scroll down to see both questions when they pop up on food traceability outcomes and some of the leading technologies. So please, if you would like to complete that or start completing that now, and we'll come back and review your inputs later on in this session. And our next slide, we will also have an opportunity for you to submit questions to Frank and have a conversation, with him. You can also upvote as part of this as well. So if you see somebody else's question you really like, go for it, and you can upvote. On our next slide, again, I'm delighted again to be joined by Frank, Deputy Commissioner of Food Policy and Response at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He came to the FDA from leadership roles with Walmart and the Walt Disney Company, and now his leadership role covers a broad spectrum, such as outbreak response, traceback investigations, product recall activities, and supply chain innovation. He even serves as principal advisor to the FDA Commissioner on food safety policies, including implementation of the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act. Welcome, Frank. You're a busy man indeed on the world of food safety.
Thank you, John. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm a big fan of the work you do and Thrive, and this desire to have a bigger conversation. I'm glad you used conversation on innovation in food. I think it's an imperative. If you can go to the next slide, please. You heard a little bit about my background. Delighted to be with you here today. I have spent my life's work, over 30 years, working on food safety and food system challenges. I like to joke that I went from the happiest place on earth, a Disney theme park, to the busiest place on earth, Walmart stores operating all over the world, to now and I'll let you fill in the blank. I actually say one of the most prestigious regulatory agencies on earth. But at Disney, I was in charge of protecting the safety of literally millions and millions of guests at theme parks and resorts all over the world. At Walmart, I was responsible for overseeing food safety for the world's largest retailer. In the U.S. alone, about 1 out of every 4 dollars spent on food is spent at a Walmart store. And at FDA, you heard the summary of my responsibilities. So food safety has been my life mission. What I'm going to try to do today is provide you with perspectives from both the public and private sector, now that I've been fortunate to be on both sides of that fence. Next slide, please. And what I want to do is have a conversation, not necessarily a presentation, but a conversation about a new era of smarter food safety. I believe we are at the cusp of a sea change of how we can address some of our food system challenges, be it food safety, sustainability, or more efficiency. And we'll talk about FDA's new blueprint. We published a blueprint that's the vision of the work we will do over the course of the next 10 years to create what we call a more digital, traceable, and safer food system. Next slide, please. Let me begin real quickly with this premise, if you could click, please, with this idea that the food system is changing. We all know that at the beginning of time, men and women were largely hunter and gatherers. They would have to go out and hunt and gather food, and you would imagine they were really concerned, probably when they woke up every day. One of their primary concerns is, are we going to have enough food to survive? If you fast forward over time, men and women started to domesticate plants and animals, and you had villages forming around water mainly. If you read the history, you fast forward into the 20th century, what did you see? The industrial farming revolution, with men and women able to produce more food than ever before to feed a growing population. And as I was growing up around the 1980s, I'd go to the grocery store with mom and dad, and there'd be about 15,000 food items or SKUs on the grocery store shelf. That was pretty impressive. At the 2000s, how many items do you think were in the typical grocery store? 50,000 SKUs. With the big box or super centers, it started nearing 70,000 plus. And where do you think we're headed as a society? Next slide, please. Next clip, please. The endless shelf, really, where consumers can get online and order anything that they want, any food item from anywhere in the world, real time. I know the pandemic has caused some SKU consolidation, but the reality, I think that'll rebound and things will change with better times. So the food system is changing. Now, a lot of people think that the food system today is terrible and it's broken. I think on balance, if you think about it, you can go into a grocery store and buy an endless number of SKUs for a fraction of your hard-earned dollar. That's pretty good. But John in his video outlined the challenges that remain ahead. Growing population, global warming, and all of these challenges are going to create pressure on the food system. And so we have to continue to evolve, just like the food system has from the beginning of time. Next slide, please. And I think that we are in the midst right now in a food revolution. The video said a food tech revolution. I believe that. Some people predict that we're going to see more changes in the food system in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 20 or 30. Many of you see the types of investments being made for a person that's been working on food system issues for over 30 years. The interest on innovating in food is so encouraging. I've never seen anything like this. Pause to think about it. Foods are being reformulated all over the world as we speak. We have new foods being realized with gene-edited foods or cell-cultured products. We have new food production methods being realized, and the food system is becoming increasingly digitized. This is all very exciting. But I believe, and I think you do too, because that's why you're listening in today, that these modern times are going to require more modern approaches. And so we're talking about it at the US FDA as a new era of smarter food safety as it relates to food safety. Now, let me reassure you, this is not a tagline or a slogan. It's truly and genuinely a new way of looking and trying to solve some of the public health challenges that remain ahead of us. I like to say, fundamentally, a new era of smarter food safety is people-led. It's going to require smart men and women like each and every one of you listening in today. For the United States, it will continue to be FSMA-based, the Food Safety Modernization Act called FSMA, the rules that guide how we're going to manage food safety, but it will be increasingly technology-enabled. And in the little bit of time we have before we stop and have a conversation, I want to give you just two quick examples on how this future is already here. You see, we're not talking about things that can't be done. They're already happening, and there's literally a host of potential solutions that are still awaiting us. We can go to the next slide. Let me begin with this issue of food traceability and how important it is. Many of you have heard food scares, whether it's romaine lettuce or others, and sometimes public health advisors tell you, well, don't eat any lettuce until we know the source of the outbreak. Well, when I was in the private sector, we wanted to see, can we do a better job at this? The reality is the food system is a very large, decentralized, and distributed food system with many actors and actresses. And I chose as the test case sliced mangoes. If you look at the center of that slide, you see a beautiful package of sliced mangoes. I wanted to see if the world's largest retailer could trace that package of sliced mangoes back to source quickly. If you think about the life journey of a mango, and this is true of many foods, it's pretty complicated. A mango seedling will take about 8 years to mature. When those trees are mature and bearing fruit, when the mangoes are ripening, they get picked by harvest crews, they get shipped to a packing house. At least in this hemisphere where I live, the mangoes are grown in Central and South America, so they get shipped by air, land, or sea to the United States. Once in the US, they go through further processing, if you're following that line. They then get shipped, in this case, to about 40 plus distribution centers across the United States. And then they made their way to about 6,000 retail units across the country. I took a package of those sliced mangoes, I brought them into one of my staff meetings, put it in the center of the conference room table, and I asked the team at the world's largest retailer, trace these mangoes back to source with specificity, and the traceback study starts right now, and I looked at my watch and wrote it down on my notepad. How long do you think it took them to trace those mangoes back to source? It took them 6 days, 18 hours, and 26 minutes. Now, some people think, wow, that's a long time. The reality, it's pretty good, because the reality today is traceability records are largely kept in what we call one step up, one step back traceability, and it's largely paper-based. So you could see the complications. We then did a proof of concept using blockchain or distributed ledger technology, and there's a reason for that. The idea is with a very big and decentralized food system, it's hard to get everybody in a singular system. So if you think about blockchain, the definition of distributed and decentralized ledger, it almost fits the attributes of a distributed and decentralized food system. We started capturing information in very simple user-friendly form with simple apps at each node or point in the food system. I then scanned the package of those sliced mangoes and was able to trace them back to source in 2.2 seconds. From 7 days to 2.2 seconds. I say that's food traceability at the speed of thought. And more importantly, it's transparency. The benefits that are gained from that. Knowing that supply chain with greater clarity allowed modifications to make those products flow a little bit quicker to store. And when you take 1 day out in terms of the flow of that product, that's 1 day of shelf life you give back to the consumer. And it also is a dramatic reduction in food waste. Think about a food scare. If you had to pull all mangoes from all sources, you're affecting the livelihoods of small farmers in Central and South America, all over. And so the goal was not traceability alone, but greater transparency in the food system. And let me say this, it was never about blockchain technology because people become fixated on that. It was about solving the public health challenge of traceability. We just happen to choose a new and emerging technology to do that. Let me give you another example on how these new and emerging technologies, next slide, please. Something that I've already done here while working at FDA is this idea of imported foods. Now, in the United States, the reality is we don't eat as much imported food as consumers like to think. On balance and overall, it's about 15%, but in certain commodity, it's much higher than others. For example, seafood. About 94% of the seafood products consumed in the United States by American consumers are coming from abroad. And you can see here a chart that depicts import lines from other countries to the United States, and they've been increasing exponentially year after year as the system evolves from being from around the corner to around the world and giving consumers more choice. That is a good thing, but it doesn't matter what country you live in, Americans and consumers worldwide want to know that foods imported into their country are safe. Now, FDA does a lot to ensure the safety of those foods. We expect foreign producers to comply with our standards. We do foreign inspections. But another thing that we do, like many countries around the world, is we screen every single imported food line. And then based on a tool that we call Predict, a computer tool with risk rankings, we determine which products we'll pull and do further analysis or investigation. But we wanted to see if we layered on this new technology of artificial intelligence or machine learning, could it strengthen our predictive capabilities? In the proof of concept that we did, we looked at 2 years of seafood shipments retrospectively, layered onto our existing system machine learning, and our proof of concept suggests that machine learning could increase our chances of finding a violative shipment by 300%. That's a whopping increase in predictive capabilities of finding if there's a container that has violative food products. And so you can see where this idea of machine learning is going to be a game changer in the future for prioritizing the type of work regulatory agencies and the private sector can do. Next slide, please. Now, I do want to pause and realize that we've just gone through the biggest test on the food system in over 100 years, the COVID pandemic. And while we all know that the virus that causes COVID-19 is not transmitted by food, it has caused havoc on many supply chains. And we've had to step up to protect food workers because food workers in supply chain continuity are what I call two sides of the same coin. But the lessons learned through the COVID pandemic, I think, are revealing opportunities. We fared pretty well. Food products are still on the grocery store shelf. There were outages, as you know, early on. There was supply chain disruptions. But I believe that the lessons learned through the COVID pandemic are revealing that we can further strengthen our food supply chain. So if you can go to the last slide, please. I just want to close on this note and then facilitate a discussion. We've just experienced a big test. I want to thank each and every one of you for what you're doing to protect consumers and make sure that they have safe and available food. But I'm convinced that the lessons learned are going to result in us having a stronger and more resilient food system. And the way we'll get there is working together. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. That was really insightful. Obviously, I had not realized how complicated the life cycle of a mango was, but on the return journey, it's even more complicated. It's incredible to hear the advances there. And I mean, needless to say, everybody, I think on the planet is very much aware of the great work the FDA has done in during this pandemic. I mean, it's commendable in terms of what has been done, and also the biggest challenge we've ever faced, in 100 years. In terms of, the pandemic response, Has the agency been able to leverage, specific technologies to address some of these? And maybe you could share a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Of course, I think what we're realizing, we've all heard the phrase that data is the new oil. That data and insights are critical during the normal course of business, but in a time of crisis, and we saw that. We wanted to know more about where were foods coming from, were there shifts or changes in the supply chain, where was the virus, how do we protect them? So early on, we made what I call a bet that in leaning in and investing in data and technology would be useful to combat the pandemic. And so people say, well, what would you do with food? Because we know the virus is not transmitted to food. Early on, we knew we wanted to get even better data and clarity and visibility on food assets, because in a food establishment or a farm is an asset if you think about it. How could we digitize and identify them and where they're located across the United States? How could we track where is COVID transmission happening in the country? Even could you layer on predictive capabilities to see where is the pandemic headed? Is there going to be surges and infections in certain regions where there's food production? Because we knew this, John, that when you start disrupting about 10% of the workforce in food production, capacity or volume or flow slows down dramatically. Mm-hmm. So the idea was, can we create digital technology tools that will allow us to see what's happening, where things are headed, so that we can further strengthen or harden food assets? Mm-hmm. And in the early days, the strengthening or hardening was, you're in a hot zone, what we call a riser community. Can we call those establishments, advise them on actions that can be taken to further protect their employees? But here in more recent days, what we're using that is to assist with vaccine distribution. Because of these tools, we've integrated with folks at CDC and in the military that are working to provide platforms so that states can do their ordering or what they call micro-planning. We've populated that tool, so if you're a state official ordering vaccines or planning for vaccine distribution in your state, you know where the food assets are. We've partnered with USDA to capture them as well, the number of estimated workers, so that it'll support vaccine distribution to what considered in the United States an essential workforce, the food and ag community. Mm-hmm. So technology clearly has played a role, and I can't imagine trying to do this on paper.
Yeah, I mean, again, incredible work, there. And I mean, you gave us a bit of an insight in terms of, the impact on blockchain, both reverse logistics tracking and the improvements made, and obviously the predictability from some of the AI technologies that you've used. Are there other examples and technology that, you're either looking at or deploying today, that's addressing and helping to improve food safety?
Yeah, there are so many. So yeah. I agree. It's what is the public health challenge that we're trying to solve, and then figure out what's the best technology to do that, as opposed to starting with the technology and trying to find a problem for it. But I would say I'm so excited about the future, and I'm so excited to have 500 listeners from around the world, because what we stand is at this cusp of doing our work very differently. If you think about how we've tried to do food safety and compliance work all over the world, John, in the 20th century, we did a great job with the tools that we had. And if you think about it, fundamentally, what we do is we try to ensure compliance of facilities or farms, an asset, how they make foods. And so, we write, whether you're in the private sector and the public sector, rules or policies on how to operate those establishments. The other thing we're trying to track are the foods themselves. It's another asset, establishments and foods. And the way we've done it with foods is we write standards of identity. We try to make the foods so that they meet those standards of identity. We use testing to make sure that the foods meet specifications, et cetera. But we live in a day and age where increasingly through technology, new tools, and digitalization, we can give all assets a voice, a digital footprint, if you will. And so you think about, we can give the facilities that make food and the foods themselves this digital footprint or voice, if you will, and we can move to a world, I think, increasingly over time, where we don't have to rely just on rules and hope that people are complying, and maybe once a year or once every 5 years go out and do an inspection to see their compliance, to one where you can move towards real-time monitoring. It's not only track and trace, it's track, trace, and monitor. So we've seen great advancements and a lot of interest in sensor technology, obviously, real-time monitoring as opposed to traditional testing. We've seen great interest in advancements in IoT, connecting things more digitally. And so the potential is really endless,
Yeah.
and it's only limited by imagination and calling people together to make it happen.
Brilliant. I think, I mean, we're obviously always fascinated with technology here in Silicon Valley, and obviously everything would thrive. But one of the things that I was fascinated in our conversations earlier, you know, you talk a lot about obviously technology, but you know, you talk about a food safety culture and why that's so important. Can you give us a little bit of an insight in terms of, you know, maybe what you mean about that, you know, how it ties into some of the challenges and opportunities for the food sector?
Yeah, John, pretty astute. I'm glad you picked up on that, because oftentimes when I'm talking to the tech crowd, they don't ask me questions about culture, but it's such an important one. And, you know, this is a lesson I learned in my early career working at the Disney organization, that, you know, you could write rules and procedures, you could master the hard sciences, the hard tech, if you will. In my case, it was food safety, food microbiology. Even what we're talking about now, it's more of a hard science, the technologies. But the reality, it's the soft stuff, that's the real hard stuff. Mm-hmm. When food production involves, at the Disney organization, about 20,000 cast members around the world, or Walmart, 2.2 million employees around the world, or the millions of people involved in food production, how do you influence the thoughts, the attitudes, the skills, and the behavior of large workforces? Because everything isn't automated. And so it's the soft stuff, that's the hard stuff. And in any discipline, you have to consider the hard sciences that you're working on, and also the social aspects of it. So food safety culture to me is shared values and beliefs of what an organization or even a country or even a planet think about food. That food safety should be a fundamental right. Everybody should have access to safe food. And that we care about food safety and the health of others so much that while we know there are rules and regulations, we're going to do this because it's the right thing. It also relates to organizations that are investing. If you truly have a food safety culture, you've ideally shaped the thoughts and attitudes of the executive and the leadership, and they're going to say, we're going to make investments in the area of food safety. We don't think this is a cost. We think this is just the right thing to do. And so it's this idea that to be successful in anything that you do, you have to incorporate principles of organizational culture and human behavior into the hard science work. Believe it or not, I actually saw that with my blockchain pilot, which is I was so focused on the technology that even a guy that's written a book on culture forgot, you know what, the soft stuff over here and bringing people along is pretty important. And in hindsight, I probably would have started working on that earlier with the technology itself.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, you know, there's a lot of technology out there, and even, you know, in the field, and farmers are getting so many options at them. And, you know, I think probably the bigger challenge is the adoption and understanding of many of the technologies that are out there. I mean, in terms of maybe one of our last questions, and by the way, we have a very active audience today. I'm seeing questions and comments coming in from all around the world. I first and foremost wish you a happy Chinese New Year is coming in, and great to see some active folks from Africa, in Nigeria, and in Europe, in Serbia as well. So thanks for tuning in, folks. Maybe you know, Frank, in terms of, you know, we've got a global audience, we've got innovators, entrepreneurs around the world. If you were to maybe have a call to action for the entrepreneurs and innovators, researchers, in terms of the blueprint that you laid out in terms of a smarter food system and food safety, what would that be, or what would you like to kind of put out, you know, to our audience, to global entrepreneurs, on how they could maybe affect the work here and support the work in terms of the FDA? And, you know, is there a way to work together, you know, on doing that? It's a question I kind of see kind of popping up here from people as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. That's a great question, because I like to think that, you know, the audience that's listening, clearly they're listening in because they have a desire to create a safer, smarter, and more sustainable planet, and help people, help businesses, and help society. And they like learning, but learning isn't only the goal. We're not here to satisfy our intellectual curiosities. We're here to take action. I suspect that's your audience. And so I'll try to give you some real practical advice, hopefully some that you haven't heard from other folks. I'd say number one, a point that I tried to emphasize that I'll make clear is, number one, identify the public health or business challenge. I say public health because in the public sector, it's not business challenges, they're public health challenges that we're trying to solve, but identify a very good, clear public health or business challenge that needs to be solved in the food system, and there are many. And one way to do that, I would suggest, is visit FDA's website, search for the New Era of Smarter Food Safety Blueprint. It's an easy read, but it outlines the broad themes and goals of the challenges we want to solve over the next decade. So we're helping in that capacity. We're saying these are big public health challenges that we want to solve, and decide if you know, based on your expertise and what you're currently working on, if there's a good match up there, and figure out if you want to help try to solve one of those. That's number one. Number two, I would say, John, in kind of the comments that I made here is, it's not only the technological solution that you're after, but I would say consider the social aspects early, how solving it will change. It will require people to work differently. Data sharing is a big problem. And so while we can digitize things, we find that sometimes it's the psychology of how people work together that's hard. And ultimately, on the second point, remember these three words: create shared value. If you can figure out how to solve some of these public health or business problems in a way that creates shared value, people will get in and participate. And what I mean by that, I'll give you the perfect example, is on traceability. The reason we got people to get in is because we were very intentional and deliberate in our brainstorming to say, how would people participate? And we said, well, if it just benefits the retailer, saying to their suppliers, everybody get in, we want to have traceability, we'll get greater supply chains, we'll reduce shrink in our stores, and we'll increase our share, people aren't going to want to participate. But if you start educating and creating it in a way so that farmers can benefit, meaning that if there's a food scare, their livelihoods won't be falsely incriminated if they continue to sell goods. Or it hasn't really emerged yet, but there's talk and work on this way. Can you facilitate farmer payment? Farmers are very interested in getting paid quickly. So if you create shared value for the farmer, for the mango processor, they said the reason we want to get in is we hope that you'll be able to add on the layer of temperature monitoring, not only track trace, but a sensor that allows you to track the temperature. Because when my mangoes don't make shelf life in stores, we get blamed by retailers. And we're not convinced it's our supply chain. So we're seeking the truth and figure out where that fits. So create shared value. Clearly, there was value in it for the retailer, and there was value in it for consumers. Consumers these days, I can tell you, I remember a day when consumers primarily were interested in a good value, but increasingly today, consumers want to know more about their food. And with the pandemic, I think people are increasingly. So create shared value would be my second point. My third point would be to really focus on aspects of the problem that you're solving in a way that allows it to scale. And what I mean about that, John, is I'm at a point in my career where I'm not so interested in just pilots. I'm interested in proof of concepts that allow us to test whether the solution is scalable or not. You've just heard the food system is pretty big. It's decentralized, it's distributed, and for it to be a real solution in the food system, it has to scale. You won't get the entire food system, but you have to get a good swath of it, whether it's a certain commodity or sector. So that's kind of where I would start. It's more kind of the lessons learned from a career in public and private sector.
Excellent. Well, Frank, this has been a really, really great conversation. I've loved the dialogue, and I know our chat line is very busy. Maybe if we can turn to the audience. We did the poll there earlier. Maybe we can take a look and see what way that's looking in terms of what the results were. I think on the first question we had was a better food traceability will result in, and it looks kind of clear. Number one there is greater supply chain transparency. I guess kind of closely followed by consumer trust and better root cause analysis. So. How does that look?
Well, I think you have a pretty astute audience. I think that's the goal. Greater transparency. You know, think about those mangoes. The reality in today's world, with the numerous small farmers in Central and South America and supply chains and stores, the reality is there's a lot of the opposite of transparency in today's food system, John. There's a lot of what I call anonymity. I often say, hey, what's the opposite of transparency? And people will say opaqueness. And I say, my favorite answer is anonymity. We really don't know where products were produced. We really don't know under what conditions they were shipped. We really don't know how they traveled to our favorite grocery store or how they end up on our table at home or our favorite restaurant. There's a lot of anonymity, and the idea of digitalization creating greater transparency, your audience gets that. But listen, this is a game changer for all of society, because transparency is probably the most powerful force. It will do more than regulations alone. When people can clearly see, it's the equivalent of shining a light, on parts of the food system. And I believe that what it will result in is identification of where there's opportunities. In the mango example, it was the realization that on average, it was taking 3 days to get mangoes across the border. Again, just take 1 day off, take 2 days off. That's huge. That type of transparency, having real clearly. But the other thing is, I think transparency, being a student of the behavioral science, it allows people to self-govern their behaviors. Do you want anonymity in a classroom where you have a bunch of students taking a test? No, you want a teacher in there, you want the lights on, you want everybody to be taking their test and not looking at the other students. Do you want a lot of anonymity in financial transactions? Maybe some do, but the reality is you want to be able to. So anonymity in general isn't a good thing for social aspects where we want people to self-govern and operate in a good way. So I think your audience got this one dead right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing people already sending in messages. They're agreeing 100% with you there on the anonymity. And the second question is interesting. It's pretty spread out in terms of where, which technology approach do you think holds the greatest promise? I mean, obviously, I think you've got us all sold on blockchain for sure. You've demonstrated and shown us the numbers and the impact. Obviously, AI, very close with sensor technology, followed by IoT, and then obviously, genetic sequencing and gene editing.
Yeah. Well, I love to see this varied response. It's interesting that blockchain and AI were at the top, and I'll comment on that, John. But the reality is, we have the ability to add what I call new tools in the toolbox. And these are all valuable tools that will pay big dividends to society in terms of return on investment. I'm a fan of distributed ledger technology, and I know there are the distributed ledger skeptics out there. I think your audience knows a lot more about it, and that's why they leaned in and been more favorable. But I think it's a powerful concept. Let me pause here, John. One of the things I say is, what does a food scare, the financial banking crisis, several years ago, political scandals, what do all those things have in common? A lack of trust. And I believe that distributed ledger technology is going to allow us to create more decentralized and distributed models of trust. I believe that we're going to toy with them as a society, which is we're going to create a systems of checks and balances, and that's the power of distributed ledger technology, where we're going to create that type of transparency in a food system. And there's going to be one version of the truth as opposed to 3 or 4 versions of the truth as we're seeing so much in society today. So I think distributed ledger technology holds a lot of promise. It's the early days, like the early days of the internet. But I think it has, and then just because of the architecture, like I said, it's a decentralized and distributed digital ledger. The food system is distributed and decentralized. But the other one that I'm really big on is artificial intelligence. Because if you think about it, in my field as a compliance, food safety professional, public health professional, it's all about prediction. Where do we think the next risk is? What do we think is the biggest risk? Where should we spend our time and energy and resources? So I'm big on that. But they all have so much promise. So I'm not surprised to see it spread out like this.
Yeah. And maybe just I'll give you a couple of comments from the audience and also maybe a few questions that are bubbling up. Just looking here, John Norwood is saying, obviously, anonymity is a great point, fully agrees with you there. He's also gone on to say, at yesterday's Wall Street Journal Global Food Forum, one distinction between US and EU producers was the focus on quality. I'd like to see US focus less on output and more on differentiated quality. So interesting, comment there, by John. On the comparisons on the US side and Europe. I don't know if you can see the questions here, Frank, but we got a question here, and it's a lengthy one. I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible from Ragvinder Rekhi. The other side of this coin is that all food starts at the farm. The intersection of the farm gate and the entry gate of the food commerce system is where we need to start tracking and linking one to the other. Farmers do not like to invest. I'm not saying this now, but it's the questionnaire. Farmers do not like to invest in technology unless compelled to do so. Then they look at an imposition with no benefit to them. How can we encourage and support adoption of technology at the farm gate?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, I say there's clearly a shared responsibility for food safety in the food system, and it involves all nodes or points in the food system. It starts on the farm and it ends in the home. But to answer your question, two things. Number one is, I didn't mention it, but if you're interested in food traceability, I would suggest that you go to the FDA's website. We've issued a proposed food traceability rule, and it's out for public comment. But the rule tries to address what parts of the food system need to capture what I call key data elements, and what are the critical tracking events. And so we're trying to do just that, is make sure that we can capture, each person do their part, but if we allow technology to connect the dots, you could have full supply chain provenance. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, that answer is, how do you get, whether it's farmers or any node in the food system, we see there being limitations on capturing records sometimes at the last mile. You have to create that shared value proposition. Like I said, people need to know, well, what's in it for me and how do I benefit from this? And that's why you just can't solve it from the vantage point of the industry sector that you're in, or from, let's say, a client that you're working for. Create shared value. Remember those three words.
Maria Cybernok, I'd like to hear about the impacts on international food trade in the face of the pandemic, and if you believe there should be a more harmonization in regulations worldwide in the future to facilitate food trade.
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. It is a global food system. We just have to realize that, and we do have to harmonize. We can't have safer food for consumers in one country versus food in another country. There's international commerce. And so for the traceability initiative that we just talked about, while we in the U.S. have proposed a rule, we realize that it can't be just for the U.S. alone. So we're frequently reaching out to our international colleagues and regulatory agencies around the world, trying to share how we're approaching it, because it has to be harmonized. If you're going to track food as a global asset, there needs to be a harmonization on how that's done.
Okay. Charmaine Khan, these are, a number of these questions are kind of very much related here. As a traceability provider, I find many farmers or producers are not ready to invest in a traceability system. What has been your experience? And I think we've chatted a little bit about that. And how will the FDA encourage them to do so?
Yeah, so again, I encourage you to go read our food traceability rule, but there's language. Well, the rule does two things. It identifies what are the key data elements. These are the data attributes, because remember my comment earlier in the presentation, John, about wanting things to scale? Mm-hmm. There are several reasons why traceability hasn't scaled. One is, I believe, because we haven't standardized what are the data elements that are needed for effective tracking. And by standardizing the key data elements, KDEs, what I believe is we're creating a universal language for food traceability in this centralized and distributed food system. But you can see what are the key data elements and the critical tracking events that are required. And the second thing the traceability rule does, it defines what types of foods we think need traceability at the start here from a regulatory purpose. And you can see how we're addressing that geographical coordinates are captured in terms of where certain food or products, commodities are grown. But I do want to create incentives so that farmers get in, not because it's a regulatory requirement, but because it's advantageous and beneficial to them.
Okay. I'll take a question from our kind of chat line there. Ricardo Scaff, how integrated is the work of the FDA with other food departments in different countries? Is there a good interaction and work to establish global standards? Yeah.
Well, you know, we could always do more here, I would say, because the food system is large and distributed and everybody's really busy. But I would say here in the U.S., one of the things I've been surprised at, I thought before I came to the federal sector that the FDA and USDA didn't communicate. The reality is we work together very closely, and I'm in conversations with my colleagues and counterparts at USDA almost every week. At the global stage, there are various forums during the pandemic. A lot of international regulatory agencies have formed a coalition, and there's a weekly conference call. So I think we're doing pretty good, but there's the need to drive more global harmonization, no question about it.
Yeah. And one last question from Colby Gordon. How does the FDA envision utilizing technologies such as blockchain, AI, IoT to solve some of these issues, creating some centralized FDA platform network backed by these disruptive technologies? So I know you talked a little bit about that already, but I think he's kind of getting at, an FDA platform network.
Yeah, right now, we're trying to do our part. We know that these new tools will be good tools to help us solve some of the challenges I mentioned. We're trying to figure out what's our role to create the appropriate standards, what's our role to create the types of incentives to allow these technology to scale, and where they interact with data coming into FDA. We are looking at the need to continue to upgrade our own internal systems. I think it's probably unlikely to see a single food traceability system for the entire world, but you can envision various systems working together, being interoperable, sharing data freely, having similar attributes in terms of governance and data quality and trust. So we're being very cognitive of what's our role to make sure that these technologies can scale and be interoperable.
Okay. Excellent. I know we're coming up on time. Frank, thank you so much. I mean, really fascinating to just hear all the work, that you're doing at the FDA, and it's fascinating just to kind of see and hear how you've implemented some of the technologies and the impact, that you're doing. Also, thank you for taking the time to share this with our audience. And, many of the entrepreneurs are obviously focused on food safety and being able to drive some solutions that are here. And then, finally, look, the pandemic has been obviously challenging to all of us, our families and homes. And I think you'll hear very loudly from our audience and from around the world the appreciation and the value, and really congratulate all the great work that the FDA has done right across the board. I mean, it's been probably the difficult year for everybody, and a super challenging year for the FDA, but we're all very, very thankful, and congratulations, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing on our food safety system.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Frank. And maybe just to move on to close out the discussion, I'd like to, again, maybe draw your attention to our next speakers. Again, we're thrilled to launch the Thrive Bayer Sustainability Challenge. We'll have leaders from Bayer talk a little bit more about that particular challenge. So please join us on April 14th. And then I'd like to then maybe do a call out to Cal Poly, as we know them very well here in California. They're doing a startup career fair on March 12th. So any startups, if you're looking for really great, smart and well-tuned in agriculture and food experts and engineers, head down to that or tune into that career fair. And then finally, I'd like to, again, thank you, our audience, for today. Really great to have everybody. Lots of great questions. I know the questions are still coming in. We'll try to get back to you on some of these questions and share them with Frank as well. Again, thank you for joining in today. Frank, thank you. Thank you for your team. They've been very helpful pulling all this together, and really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to keeping the dialogue and momentum going on food safety and supporting the FDA's goals and challenges. So again, thank you, folks, and be safe, and thanks to my team for all the hard work pulling this together. Thank you, folks. Take care.